Imagine this. Deep in the woodlands of Bryansk, in the middle of night, a chain of detonations rips through the blackness. Metal conduits that previously transported the cornerstone of Russia's energy dominion collapse like aluminum. Blazes erupt into the air. And in Moscow, within the Kremlin, warning signals begin sounding. Because this was not a rocket. It was not an aerial assault. It was something considerably more alarming. Someone had gained entry to the pipeline. Someone had positioned the explosives weeks, perhaps months beforehand. Someone had remained patient, and then at precisely the ideal instant, they activated a trigger. Welcome back to Bradley Madden. If you have been watching this channel, you realize that the conflict in Ukraine has never been solely about front lines and unmanned aircraft. It has consistently been about energy, about currency, about the economic sustenance that keeps Putin's military apparatus functioning. And today we are going to demonstrate with statistics, with verified accounts, and with a degree of tactical insight the corporate media declines to provide you precisely how Ukraine is dismantling the energy giant that Russia previously was. Pipe by pipe, vessel by vessel, ruble by ruble. If you are not currently subscribed to Bradley Madden, do it immediately. Press that subscribe button and activate your notifications because what we are about to present for you is not outdated information. It is the blueprint to how this conflict concludes. Let's dive in. Let's begin with that detonation in Bryansk. Charter 97 indicates that the military forces of Ukraine effectively executed a concealed mission to destroy a vital intersection of the Druzhba oil pipeline in the Bryansk area. The Druzhba, rendered from Russian, the term signifies friendship. This is the conduit that formerly represented the financial connection between the Soviet alliance and Europe. The pipeline that channeled billions of dollars into Moscow's coffers year after year. The pipeline that Vladimir Putin weaponized, restricting deliveries to intimidate governments, to manipulate politicians, to compel nations into compliance. That pipeline is currently ablaze in a woodland. But here is the element that should prevent Russian intelligence agencies from sleeping soundly. The operation was not performed by a rocket crew or an unmanned aircraft unit. According to the account, Ukrainian forces employed a remotely activated explosive system. Consider what that implies. It indicates Ukrainian agents or resistance networks functioning behind Russian territory had direct proximity to that conduit long enough to install explosive devices and then vanish. They remained patient. They selected their timing. And when they were prepared, they triggered from a safe location. This is not conventional combat. This is covert infrastructure destruction of the most advanced variety. And this was not the initial assault. Back in August of 2025, the Druzhba pipeline had previously been compromised once. As documented by CNN in December 2025, the conduit transporting Russian petroleum to the handful of remaining EU nations that still rely on it had been struck 5 occasions since August. 5 occasions. But this newest operation, this remote triggering in Bryansk, is the follow-up blow, the elimination verification, the action intended to guarantee that even if Russia mended the previous destruction, the maintenance crew showed up to discover another portion torn apart. The friendship conduit is now a mangled testament to a policy that has rebounded disastrously. Now, here is where it becomes genuinely extraordinary. The destruction did not conclude at a woodland pipeline. It penetrated directly into the pulsing core of Russia's military force capability. United 24 Media has disclosed an astonishing operation carried out by Ukraine's primary intelligence agency identified as the GUR. What they eliminated was not a frontline supply warehouse. It was a 400 kilometers extended military fuel conduit functioning in the Moscow military zone itself. Let that register. Under the gaze of the Kremlin, 400 kilometers of pipeline supplying the armor, the aircraft, the missile defense systems that safeguard the Russian capital. Charter 97 supplements that 3 primary military petroleum routes in the territory were attacked simultaneously in a synchronized assault engineered for greatest interruption. This is not insurgent combat. This is supply chain asphyxiation. You can station 1,000 tanks surrounding Moscow. You can arrange a 100 combat aircraft on your tarmacs. But if the conduit that supplies them has been eliminated 400 kilometers distant, Those vehicles are merely costly ornaments. Heavy machinery accumulating corrosion. Ukraine has located the blood vessels, and it is severing them. While the conduits were being destroyed, another initiative was progressing from the heavens. According to an evaluation released by Forbes, Russia's fuel shortage has been intensifying throughout 2025. Ukrainian extended-range drones methodically attacked the processing columns of significant refineries throughout the nation. These are not replaceable parts. They are meticulously constructed facilities that Russia straightforwardly cannot substitute under international restrictions. The outcome is a severe deficit of premium-grade gasoline. Consider the irony of this predicament. Russia is one of the biggest petroleum-producing countries on the globe. It rests on vast deposits of crude, and yet it cannot generate sufficient processed gasoline for its own citizens. It is like a chef who controls the biggest grain estate in the nation but has no stove. He is encircled by wheat, and he is famishing. The statistics from the Baker Institute for Public Policy are remarkable. By early October 2025, Ukrainian assaults had impaired at least 21 of Russia's 38 biggest petroleum processing plants. That is 38% of Russia's principal processing capability disabled or significantly weakened. And according to coverage from the Moscow Times and Bloomberg, Ukrainian intelligence agencies executed around 160 effective operations on petroleum extraction and processing installations in Russia throughout 2025 alone. According to Bloomberg's internal estimates, Ukraine performed 120 strikes on Russian energy installations in 2025, with 81 of those aimed at petroleum refineries specifically. The magnitude of this initiative is nearly beyond comprehension. The insurance companies absolutely noticed it. Accounts from the Moscow Times verify that damages from protection against terrorism and disruption threats surpassed 100% in 2025, climbing multiple times over due to the severity and regularity of attacks. Now, as we referenced previously, the frontline consequence of this is not theoretical. It is observable on the terrain. Physically, the most striking illustration of what this fuel deprivation resembles in reality is occurring right now in Crimea. The landmass that Putin captured through force in 2014, the prized possession of his territorial aspirations. The region he announced would be Russian permanently. According to coverage from the Moscow Times, Russian-administered officials in Crimea have enacted gasoline limitations. Limitations in 2025 and seized Ukrainian land that Putin guaranteed would be a demonstration of the advanced Russian approach of leadership. Residents are standing in line for hours. Municipal transportation services are being reduced. Armed forces receive preferential distribution, leaving regular citizens abandoned with depleted tanks and nowhere to go. Putin assured the residents of Crimea they were becoming part of a great power. He guaranteed them wealth. He guaranteed them power. Instead, he delivered them allocation vouchers. The mental toll of this cannot be exaggerated. The complete basis of Russia's seizure depended on a straightforward story. We are powerful. We are dependable. We deliver. That story is now dissipating like gasoline from a depleted reservoir. And speaking of disappearing income, let us discuss what all of this material devastation is causing to Russia's finances. Because this is where the tactical overview becomes genuinely catastrophic. Charter 97 references governmental figures indicating that Russia's petroleum and natural gas fiscal income have plummeted by 34% relative to the prior year. Verified separately by the Ian's Research Institute, which observed that in November 2025, petroleum and natural gas proceeds to the Russian national treasury were 34% reduced year over year. The institute additionally cautioned that this number probably understates the actual harm since tax remittances in November capture October's results and pricing information from December indicated an even sharper reduction was likely. Here's why this figure is so significant. According to Euronews, petroleum shipments represent roughly one-third of Russia's complete national treasury. One-third. The Russian government underwrites its armed forces, compensates its troops, bankrolls its weapons factories, and sustains internal welfare programs almost completely from energy income. A 34% decline in that solitary income source is not a setback. It is a foundational emergency. Economist Vladislav Inozemtsev explained to Euronews that the assault initiative was remarkably well-focused. As he elaborated, striking a petroleum refinery results in weeks of combustion, physical harm that requires months to restore, and the total inability to rapidly reallocate output. An unmanned aircraft plant can be reconstructed in days. A refinery cannot. Now, just when Russia required to offset by shipping more petroleum to compensate for the treasury deficit, the maritime channels began shutting. Let's discuss Turkey. For much of this conflict, Turkey maintained a careful balancing act. It declined to adopt Western restrictions while concurrently providing Ukraine aircraft and preserving commercial connections with both parties. But even Turkey had a threshold. Charter 97 indicates that Turkey's biggest petroleum transporter formally discontinued its dealings with Russia. A Turkish maritime firm was compelled to end Russian-connected commerce after its ship, Mersin, was harmed in one of Ukraine's maritime assaults on the Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea. As validated by Wikipedia's records of the November 2025 assault initiative, the mathematics had shifted. U.S. restrictions were cutting deeper. Ukrainian drones were converting the Black Sea into a danger zone, and conducting commerce with Putin's petroleum network had turned not just a regulatory hazard, but a tangible one. Without dependable Turkish collaborators, Russia's Shadow Fleet is vulnerable. And the Shadow Fleet, my colleagues, is the narrative beneath the narrative. This is something you must comprehend. When Western restrictions and the G7 petroleum price ceiling were originally enacted in 2022, Russia constructed a vast alternative shipping framework. A collection of deteriorating vessels frequently displaying registrations of opportunity from locations like Panama, Gambia, or the Comoros. Ships documented through facade corporations in the UAE, Hong Kong, and unnamed ownership entities designed to render monitoring unfeasible. They would deactivate their tracking systems, fabricate their routing records, and transfer Russian petroleum to purchasers in India, China, and Turkey at rates slightly beneath the 60 per barrel threshold. By the conclusion of 2022, this shadow fleet totaled over 600 ships. By December 2023, projections varied from 1,000 to approximately 400 vessels. Ukrainian intelligence calculates that as of February 2026, approximately 1,337 ships are functioning in this system. 1 in 6 vessels on the international market, 17% of worldwide tanker volume. Russia believed it had discovered a way out. Ukraine resolved to shut it. According to the Wall Street Journal, referenced by Charter 97, Ukraine may have destroyed or incapacitated roughly a dozen vessels of Russia's Shadow Fleet during 2025. But the initiative intensified significantly through the fall. According to coverage by Euromaidan Press, Ukraine attacked over 160 Russian processing plants and energy sites with extended-range drones. And by December 2025, the Ukrainian intelligence agency, the SBU, had carried out its maiden extended-range assault in the Mediterranean Sea, hitting a restricted vessel that had recently transported petroleum to India. According to Wikipedia's records of the Shadow Fleet Initiative, the SBU additionally executed drone attacks on the vessels Virat and Kairos near the Turkish Black Sea shoreline in late November 2025, and then continued with an operation on the EU restricted vessel Dashan. But here is the pivotal development. In early March 2026, in the central Mediterranean, a ship designated the Arctic Medegas ignited following a presumed Ukrainian drone assault. As recorded by maritime security researchers at Ghost Ships, this was the initial verified operation on a ship from Russia's liquefied natural gas Shadow Fleet. The Arctic Medegas had been functioning in explicit violation of US, UK, and EU restrictions since 2024, conveying LNG from the Arctic LNG-2 facility. It was, according to the account, apparently loaded with Arctic LNG-2 product when hit. Ukraine had just elevated the confrontation from unrefined petroleum to liquefied natural gas. The threat assessment for every carrier transporting Russian goods altered in a moment, and the judicial pressure was intensifying the military pressure. The European Union has now restricted nearly 600 ships in the Shadow Fleet, introducing approximately monthly additions of 41 supplementary vessels at a stretch through December 2025. The United States restricted 183 vessels in a singular announcement in January 2025. Ukraine itself then surpassed both in a solitary action, designating 656 ships in one proclamation. As President Zelensky declared in December 2025 when revealing the measure, and I am summarizing here, this is the biggest restrictions action ever imposed against vessels operating for the aggressor, and Ukraine will guarantee every ship, every vessel-owning enterprise, and the complete framework of Russia's petroleum distribution is additionally prohibited by its allies. The consequence of all this coercion, Charter 97 documents an unprecedented amount of Russian petroleum trapped at sea. Nobody wants to purchase it. Nobody wants to underwrite it. Nobody wants to transport it. It is drifting idle wealth. Millions of barrels floating in global waters, gradually transforming from tactical resources into worthless deterioration. If you are finding this examination worthwhile, this is precisely why Bradley Madden operates. We deliver you the intelligence the conventional news rotation skips over. Subscribe, press the notification icon, and forward this video with someone who ought to comprehend what is genuinely occurring in this conflict. Now, let us return to something we referenced previously. The Druzhba detonation did not merely impact Russia. It transmitted a tremor westward across the frontier into Belarus. And this element of the account is seldom discussed. For years, Alexander Lukashenko's administration in Minsk has endured on a singular financial lifeline. Russia delivers affordable crude via the Druzhba conduit. Belarus processes it at the enormous Moser petroleum facility. Belarus then markets the processed goods to Europe or back into Russia at a markup. It was a revenue-generating scheme, a petroleum-based subsidy presented as a transportation charge. That arrangement has now been eliminated. Without Russian crude traveling through those conduits, the Moser facility becomes a corroding structure. Lukashenko forfeits his transportation income. He forfeits his shipping proceeds. And most importantly, he forfeits the fuel he requires to maintain his own domestic enforcement mechanism running. An authoritarian regime operates on diesel equally as much as it operates on intimidation. When the diesel expires, the government starts to deteriorate. Putin is too preoccupied with Moscow's own treasury difficulties to support his subordinate ally. Belarus is now confronting vacant conduits and a discontented citizenry, and the administration has never been more vulnerable. But the tremor does not conclude at Minsk. It penetrates into the ground of Russia itself. The elimination of processing plants in Ryazan and petroleum storage in Rostov has prompted a homeland emergency the Kremlin is frantically attempting to conceal. Southern Russia is the farming center of the country, the granary region, the territory that nourishes the population. But contemporary agriculture depends on diesel. Tractors depend on diesel. Harvesting machines depend on diesel. The vehicles that transport the crops to warehousing centers depend on diesel. According to investigative accounts from the Moscow Times, agriculturalists in the Rostov and Stavropol territories were documenting severe deficiencies of diesel fuel throughout 2025. The explanation is harsh in its directness. When a petroleum storage is eliminated and provisions become scarce, the Russian armed forces receive precedence. The leftover diesel travels east to Donetsk, to the armor, to the weaponry. The agriculturalist receives nothing. And if the agriculturalist cannot gather the grain, the cost of bread in Russia escalates dramatically. This is a nutritional stability emergency unfolding in gradual progression. We examined shrinkflation in earlier Bradley Madden installments, but a bread deficit is not shrinkflation. It is something considerably more governmentally hazardous. Putin is exchanging next year's crop for this week's armed operations. That is a transaction no ruler in Russian history has ever endured completing. And the cascade affects every Russian motorist at the station. As Reuters has recorded, commercial fuel costs inside Russia climbed through 2025, even as Russia continued as the world's second biggest petroleum shipper because the supply network is fractured. When the processing plant in Ryazan ceases generating gasoline for Moscow, you cannot easily redirect inventory from Siberia, The railways are congested with armed forces convoys or interrupted by resistance operations. The outcome is what specialists are labeling fuel wastelands. Complete territories where filling stations display those notices. No supply. For a nation as territorially enormous as Russia, where transportation is not an indulgence, but a survival necessity, this is a mobilization. Emergency vehicles exhaust supply. Delivery trucks halt. Local enterprises stall. The marketplace locks. And then the psychological agreement fractures. Putin's unvoiced guarantee to the Russian populace was consistently this: we may not be liberated, but we will consistently have supplies. We have petroleum. We have natural gas. We have warmth. You will never stand for gasoline like it is 1990. That guarantee is now finished. The armed forces' ramifications are clear and instantaneous. The Rostov Atlas storage that was eliminated was not merely a holding installation. It was the operational backbone of Russia's southern armed forces region. Every armored brigade, every weapons battalion, every assault helicopter division relies on a continuous flow of petroleum trucks functioning on a stable distribution network. By eliminating the storage in Rostov, Ukraine compelled Russian supply teams to travel greater distances from deeper territory to provision frontline formations. Greater distances mean additional time on highways vulnerable to Ukrainian drone surveillance, additional mechanical deterioration, reduced resupply frequency, additional equipment failing between deployments. According to ground accounts that Broadly Madden has been monitoring, we are currently observing Russian offensive maneuvers faltering in the south, not from immediate Ukrainian counteroffensives, but merely because the aggressors exhausted supply. A 40-ton armored vehicle without diesel is merely a 40-ton burial chamber. Ukraine is not merely protecting its homeland. It is overcoming the Russian military by shutting off the flow. Let's now examine something the initial coverage addressed and which has subsequently been completely validated: the Arctic LNG-2 catastrophe. Bloomberg documented that output at the premier Arctic LNG facility decreased by over 90% in November 2025. As we previously outlined, the project's LNG vessels are currently being pursued in the Mediterranean. The specialized ice-capable ships required to carry the gas are either under restrictions, impounded by Western governments, or currently under immediate danger of Ukrainian drone operations. The containment facilities are filled, the vessels are not arriving. The gas is confined in the Arctic permafrost, shifting from a resource into a burden. Putin placed a $21 billion calculated wager on Arctic LNG-2. The reasoning was sophisticated. If Europe no longer desires Russian gas through pipeline, market it as liquefied natural gas to Asia, substitute the European clientele with Chinese and Indian consumers, establish an energy dominion that does not rely on Western cooperation. That wager has failed. Russia is not merely forfeiting the petroleum income of today. It is forfeiting the gas clientele of tomorrow. The energy giant is being methodically deconstructed, one installation at a time, and the geopolitical marginalization is quickening. As documented by the Chatham House evaluation published in November 2025, worldwide petroleum market dynamics are granting Ukraine's international supporters with supplementary political justification to back the energy initiative. With a worldwide petroleum oversupply moderating global markets against significant cost increases, Western administrations encounter reduced domestic financial consequences for intensifying the constraints on Russian energy. The Time magazine evaluation from November 2025 was direct on this matter. If Ukraine maintains its operations on processing plants, conduits, shipping terminals, and associated facilities, it may be able to exhaust the Kremlin dry, or at minimum dry sufficiently to compel Putin into genuine peace discussions. Even India, which had been one of Russia's most significant alternative purchasers, has started reducing its considerable Russian petroleum purchases after confronting the possibility of 50% U.S. duties. China's long-anticipated fresh pipeline agreement with Russia is requiring years to develop. The substitute markets that Putin counted on are either contracting, wavering, or being discreetly influenced into adherence. The Baker Institute's analysis encapsulates the tactical brilliance of what Ukraine is accomplishing. From 2022 through 2025, Russia's shadow fleet could typically evade Western restrictions through facade enterprises and re-registered ships. But when the implementation method transitions from tribunals and regulatory departments to strike teams and detonations, the formula reverses completely. Establishing a fresh facade enterprise and re-registering a vessel is rapid and comparatively inexpensive. Reconstructing a petroleum processing plant damaged by targeted munitions is prolonged and extraordinarily costly. Ukraine has transferred restrictions implementation into the operational sphere, and in that sphere, it has a conclusive superiority. So let us consolidate all of this together, because the period of detonations we examined at the opening of this video was not a series of unrelated occurrences. It was a synchronized exhibition of a thorough strategic philosophy. Ukraine severed Belarus from its financial lifeline. It severed Russian agriculturalists from their cultivation fuel. It severed Russian inhabitants from their routine transportation. It severed Russian armored divisions from their propulsion. It severed Putin's Arctic LNG ambition from the international marketplace, and it severed the Russian national treasury from a third of its yearly income. This is comprehensive infrastructure conflict, and it is succeeding. The outlook for Russia advancing into 2026 is an ideal catastrophe. The conduits are fractured. The processing plants are impaired or eliminated. The vessels are being pursued across the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The treasury is hemorrhaging. The Turkish collaborators have departed. India is retreating. The Arctic is immobilized in more respects than one. And the civilian populace, already contending with casualty reports and rising costs, now confronts fuel limitations, bread cost surges, and the emotional degradation of standing at depleted filling stations. Putin commenced this conflict convinced he could freeze Europe into capitulation with his energy instrument. Instead, he has demolished his own energy foundation. The instrument has been redirected, and Russia is now the one operating on vapors. What does this indicate for the approaching months? The Baker Institute evaluation from late 2025 observes that if Ukraine amplifies its assault initiative against unrefined petroleum conduits and shipping terminals, the volumetric statistics that have until now permitted Russia to sustain a facade of petroleum shipping consistency could disintegrate. Currently, Russia has adjusted for impaired processing plants by directing more crude straight to shipping destinations, concealing the internal harm. But that is a precarious alternative. Eliminate the terminals, eliminate the shipping conduits, and the complete apparatus disintegrates at once. Ukraine recognizes this. The GR recognizes this. And the sequence of assaults through early 2026, redirecting attention toward terminal infrastructure, vessel pathways, and oceanic energy resources, indicates the initiative is reaching its most critical stage yet. The energy giant is not merely faltering. It is being methodically dismantled by a smaller country with remarkable accuracy, remarkable bravery, and a tactical vision that will be examined in military institutions for generations to come. And that, my colleagues, is why the Druzhba detonation in the woodlands of Bryansk was not merely a headline. It was a declaration that the conflict's focal point has transformed, that Ukraine has discovered the most potent mechanism in the whole confrontation, and that it is activating that mechanism with everything it possesses. Bradley Madden will continue monitoring every assault, every restriction, every vessel seizure, and every treasury report emerging from Moscow, because this is how the conflict concludes. Not inevitably in a singular conclusive engagement on the battle line, but in the gradual, persistent, arithmetically unavoidable disintegration of a military economy that can no longer fund for itself. What do you believe? Can the Russian economy withstand a prolonged 34% reduction in energy income? Will the petroleum deficiencies extend from Crimea to the avenues of Moscow? And is Ukraine's energy initiative the most tactically decisive action of the whole conflict? Let us hear in the comments below. We review every single one. If this thorough examination provided you understanding on the actual nature of this confrontation, press the like button. Forward this video with someone who still assumes this conflict is merely about battle positions on a chart. And subscribe to Bradley Madden so you never overlook the examination that genuinely counts. We will naturally keep you informed as this initiative continues to develop. Thanks for watching.